The Financial Survival Network, helping you survive and thrive in the new economy. Go to CarrieLutz.com and sign up for 30 free micro trainings on financial survival.
1490 WGCH. This is Carrie Lutz. You're listening to the Financial Survival Network. Back with Chris Duane at don't-tread-on.me. And we're back to hopefully our weekly conversation about world trends, both social and economic and political. I guess that's three. And Chris, what's going on here?
Much better. I've been knocked out for the last 2 or 3 weeks with this ridiculous cold, but I'm on Z-Pak now and on the road to recovery.
Yeah, well, those antibiotics, you've been on Z-Pak many a time. Glad you're feeling better. So Europe isn't going to fail. And it's funny, I'm in my office here, and the guy next door, he's in business, and we're talking 3 days ago, and he says to me, it looks like Europe's going to fail. It looks like they're just going to let it all blow up. And I said to him, look, this is all stagecraft. The deal has already been cut. I don't care if they say it's illegal for the ECB to print money. It's illegal for Germany to be part of this. It doesn't matter because nobody wants to be known. No one wants to leave a legacy as the person who allowed Europe to blow up. So they're all going to come together in the end, and they're all going to print money because there is no way out of it, and all they can really do is kick the can down the road. Fast forward to yesterday, what happened, right?
Yeah. I think the kind of interesting takes I got from yesterday's action is that this seems to me the precursor towards something that they know is coming down the road. When they introduce all these liquidity swaps, they didn't necessarily print money. They left money available for all the banks to borrow against the dollar very cheaply. And once that money gets thrown into the system, all these central banks can then borrow money from the Fed at 0.5% interest, borrow this money and then go to governments like Greece who have all these bonds and stuff, or non-performing assets, and banks can dump their, unwanted assets to the central banks, and the central banks take all these assets off the market and help clean up the mess, just like they did in 2008. It's par for the course. I think that they're going to continue to paper over any problem out there that they need to. Trillions upon trillions of dollars. It doesn't matter to them, and they don't need any political. This is another point. They don't need any political approval for this anymore. I mean, Bloomberg did a Freedom of Information Act, and they got anywhere from $6 to $13 trillion that the Federal Reserve pumped into the world system from 2008 to 2011. And there was no hearings. There was no, votes of Congress. There was no Hank Paulson, putting his knee in front of Nancy Pelosi saying, please give us the $700 billion. This is trillions upon trillions of dollars printed out of thin air. And, what we're not seeing is MF Global cause the same kind of effect long-term capital management did, because all these things are now, they have this course set off where they just print the money and they take care of it quietly. They take the guilty parties out to the woodshed. They take care of them and wrap it up and clean it over and paper it over real well. And that's why I don't think any of this, any of these banking problems are going to be the downfall to this system. There has to be a real, something in the real world that causes it. And I, being a silver investor, I tend to think at some point, some real thing is going to happen where they can't paper over it. Whether it's, oil disruption in the Gulf, whether it's, a default of the silver market at the COMEX, whether, there's a, food scare and we see another run up. Something in the physical world has to happen in order for this paradigm to get rocked again. Because I don't think it's going to be like 2008 where there's something in the paper world that got done, because the central banks are doing now preemptive, liquidity pumps, ready for this stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I'm kind of in agreement with you there. I don't see, I just see them papering over this indefinitely, just it's QEE, quantitative easing European style, and as long as they can keep banging out the units, and the units don't become worthless, or there isn't a massive loss of faith in those currency units, and it's irrelevant what you want to call those units at this point. They all have no independent existence other than on a ledger entry. They mean nothing.
And all this money that they're printing, Kerry, it's all staying in this upper stratosphere of money. I mean, they get $700 trillion in derivatives now. Okay. Mm-hmm. If even 0.1% ever found its way into the real economy, where somebody cashed out some of these winning positions and actually went to go spend it on real things like land and businesses and stuff like that, it would blow up the real world economy. So all these trillions of dollars that they're printing, it's in this other stratosphere, in the banking world where it doesn't affect into the real world. But this isn't going to last forever because some of these big power guys, I mean, I was just on David Morgan's Mastermind series this past week or two.
I saw that.
And, my point to these guys are, because a lot of these guys are fund managers, is that the system, it's a musical chair system. And at some point, somebody's going to say, hey, I want out. And it's going to take that one guy at the margin to take his money from this fake, paper digital, I have a brokerage account with, 8 figures in it, and start pumping it into the real world. That's going to cause, this break. And once that pin's popped, man, that's it.
Yeah, it's game over, right? So it's a big confidence scheme, right? That's what we call these things, because it all relies upon the confidence of the public to keep on using these units. And I was talking to Chris Vermeulen yesterday, and he just thinks they'll keep coming up with new systems. The dollar will go, and then they'll come up with a new one. But once the confidence is gone, it's like once the love is gone in a relationship, it's real hard to ever get it back. You need a lot of therapy and a lot of hand-holding and a lot of deliveries of flowers to ever get the love back. And
if it ever does. I mean, that's the thing with all paper currencies. Once faith is lost, it's gone forever. I mean, I don't know of any currency that was able to reestablish itself after massive abuse. And it's just, and it has to happen. I mean, this abuse has to happen in order to keep the system going. This is a line I keep saying over and over again. And I hope it enters in the social landscape. But more debt has to be created every year in excess of the debt and interest accrued the year before, or else the whole system has the mother of all margin calls. Yeah. And that's not what the owners want.
It's funny. I'm listening to a lecture series on World War I, because that was such a pivotal event in the whole evolution of big government and overreaching government. And they're talking about how, like in England, they had this massive inflation and prices went up 10 times, but wages only doubled. And that's the problem with the inflation thing, is that the wages don't keep up with the prices, and eventually it blows up. I wanted to tell you, like, this week I went to see Rush Limbaugh live in Manhattan at the Town Hall Theater. And, I was mainly there from a technical aspect. I don't really listen to him anymore.
He's a good broadcaster, though. I mean, there's no doubt about that.
Hey, he's a master. We should all aspire to his level of broadcasting excellence, because, honestly, I looked at him. He was back up. He gained another 40 pounds, gained all that weight back. He looked like hell. I thought he sounded a little short of breath.
That'll do it to you.
Yeah, and his voice wasn't as strong. It's like when you go on the radio, they compress it, they do stuff to it. His voice wasn't as good as I expected it. Plus, they don't use really fine microphones.
Well, what did he talk about, Kerry? Because I mean, Rush was a guy I was enamored with for years. I went to a show back in the 90s when he had this show. I had both of my book signed when I was in the College Republicans, and he was a guy that I felt like everything he said I agreed with. And I haven't listened to him in, I don't know, 10, 15 years, and certainly not since I've been awake. But where does he stand on what's going on? I mean, does he ever address the issues that we touch, or is he still in this left-right paradigm where Obama's the bad guy? And that
you nailed it, Chris. Let me just say this, okay? You and I consider to be trans-political, because these parties, it's just like the guys on Wall Street. The people in the parties cause the spending. They their masters are Wall Street, and they're the ones responsible for the mess that the country's in by the policies, the laws, etc. So to think that you're going to replace these guys with other guys who want to be just like them and then get a solution to the problem cannot happen. So
No.
I'm against that duality thing, because both of them, the Republicans have their ideology of so-called limited government and, keeping, low taxes, blah, blah, blah. The Democrats are big government, helping the little guy, and yet neither of them adhere to any ideology. It's not about ideology. So forget the parties. They're not the answer to the question. They are the problem. And that's why, so I'm listening to them, and it's like, hey, Rush, you're good. You're a great speaker, great sense of humor, great storyteller. I mean, the guy is an amazing raconteur, but he doesn't talk about how corrupt and rotten the system is at its core, and that's what it's about. This is the problem. Which you and I, we're talking about the truth, but we don't have 20 million people listening to us. But he seems to be getting more and more enamored of Ron Paul. One thing that he did talk about, I just want to cover real quick, American exceptionalism. All right? It's not the concept that we are the chosen people, we are exceptional. What he describes it as the founding of the country with people who had, were really smart people who had amazing, intense core beliefs, and they were able to establish something totally different where you had a government of limited powers, and that responsibility for one's life, rested with the individual. The individual was sovereign, and I think
so. He said that, right?
Yeah, and I think.
All right. So what do we have now that resembles anywhere close to that?
Hey, you tell me. What do we got? Creeping fascism. They just passed a bill in the Senate that everybody could be a terrorist, and they could detain you if you're a terrorist in the U.S. with no trial, no nothing, and we'll see if it gets through the House. But we've got fascism, totalitarianism, collectivism, and every other negative ism that you can imagine. Yeah. So, where, like you say, where does it leave us? But, to go see him, and then the crowd is so transfixed by him. Like,
oh yeah, I mean, I was one of them. So
ditto head,
I know it.
Mega dittos, Giga dittos, Terra dittos. But you have to understand that the guy does have some of the equation right, in my opinion. But, let's face it, the guy's worth upwards of $1 billion. He's got a real vested interest in the system staying the way it is.
And that's why you're never going to find anybody who's really successful in the system, to speak out against it, because they have too much at stake. I mean, guys like me and you, I mean, yeah, we're all right, but, we're certainly not, sitting on top of, millions upon millions of dollars with, our image and our friends and our network and all that other stuff that's all tied together. That's why I watch so many of these guys on CNBC and, some of these big guys. I mean, they speak half truths, they speak 90% truths, but they're never going to point at, the Federal Reserve. They're never going to point at, the collectivist party. They're never going to point at, a different consciousness. They're never going to, say, hey, let's get back to the Constitution. And that's why Ron Paul